I'll never forget the look on my brother's face. He stood on my porch, my brand new custom-built porch overlooking 300 feet of private beachfront, with 3 massive suitcases, 2 beach chairs, a cooler that probably weighed 40 pounds, and his wife Sienna standing beside him recording everything on her phone like I was their personal resort staff about to welcome them to paradise. The Pacific Ocean crashed behind my house, the sound mixing with the awkward silence as I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, not moving aside to let them in. My name is Kieran Moss, 34 years old, self-made real estate investor, and as of 3 weeks ago, owner of a $1.9 million oceanfront property that my older brother Garrett had no idea I could afford. Because for 34 years, Garrett had made it his personal mission to remind me that I was the failure of the family, the one who would never amount to anything, the little brother who should be grateful that successful people like him even acknowledged my existence. He smirked at me now, that familiar condescending expression I'd seen countless times growing up, and said, "Wow. So the failure finally bought something nice? I gotta admit, little brother, I'm impressed. Didn't think you had it in you." His wife giggled, still filming. "Babe, show them the luggage. We packed for 10 days. 10 days. They'd packed for 10 days. In my house. Without asking. I looked at the suitcases, looked at the beach chairs, looked at my brother's face, so confident, so certain that he'd be staying here, that his baby brother would be grateful for the honor of hosting him. I leaned against the doorframe, stared directly at the luggage pile they'd created, and said calmly, "You can leave them at the hotel." Garrett's smirk faltered. "What?" "The hotel," I repeated, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. "I made you a reservation. The Coastal Inn, 40 minutes inland. It's got a 2-star rating on Google, but the reviews say the continental breakfast is adequate. That should work for you." I held out the confirmation paper. He thought I was joking. I could see it in his eyes, the moment where he tried to figure out if this was some kind of bit, some kind of setup for a laugh. It wasn't. His wife stopped recording. The smile died on Garrett's face. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years around my brother. Power. My brother had one hobby growing up, one skill he perfected over 34 years, humiliating me. It started when we were kids. I was 8, he was 12 when Dad bought me my first bike, a used BMX from a garage sale that I'd been begging for all summer. It wasn't new, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I loved it. Garrett had taken one look at it and announced to the entire neighborhood, "Look at Kieran's garbage bike. I wouldn't ride that thing if you paid me." He'd said it loud enough that the kids playing basketball in the driveway next door had heard. They'd all looked over at me, at my used bike, and suddenly my excitement had curdled into shame. That was Garrett's gift, making me feel small, making me feel less than. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. And hit that hype button to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where you're all watching from. When I was 16 and got my first car, a 1998 Honda Civic with 160,000 miles that I'd saved up for working at the grocery store, Garrett had told everyone at Thanksgiving dinner that it looked like a pregnant toaster. The whole family had laughed. Mom had tried to hide her smile. Dad had said, "Garrett, be nice," but he'd been laughing too. I'd sat there feeling my face burn while my brother entertained everyone at my expense. When I was 22 and moved into my first apartment, a studio in a neighborhood that was more up and coming than arrived, Garrett had visited once, looked around and told me it smelled like financial failure. "Seriously, Kieran," he'd said, wrinkling his nose dramatically. "This place is depressing. How do you live like this?" "It's what I can afford," I'd said quietly. "That's the problem," he'd replied. "You've always been okay with what you can afford instead of figuring out how to afford more." This from a man who was living beyond his means, leasing cars he couldn't afford, taking vacations on credit cards he'd never pay off. But perception was reality in Garrett's world, and he'd perfected the art of looking successful while drowning in debt. Garrett loved to compare our lives, loved to create a scorecard where he always won and I always lost. When he'd bought his first house at 28, a decent 3-bedroom in the suburbs with a mortgage that stretched his budget to breaking, he'd called me specifically to brag about it. "Just closed on the house," he'd said, his voice full of that performative pride he always had. $300K, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. Got a great interest rate. Guess this is what happens when you have good credit and make smart choices. The implication was clear. I didn't have good credit or make smart choices. Never mind that his great interest rate was 6.5%, and he'd put down only 3%, meaning he was underwater the moment he signed the papers. Never mind that his monthly payment was eating up 45% of his take-home pay, leaving him constantly stressed about money but too proud to admit it. He looked successful. He had a house in a good neighborhood, one with an HOA and neighborhood watch signs and the right kind of schools nearby. That's all that mattered to Garrett, the appearance of success. I'd congratulated him at the time, genuinely happy that he'd achieved a goal, but even in accepting my congratulations, he'd found a way to diminish me. Thanks, man. Hey, you should think about buying soon, too. I mean, I know your apartment situation is comfortable for you, but a man your age should own property. It's embarrassing to still be renting when you're pushing 25. I'd been 24 at the time, still working as a property manager, still learning everything I could, still saving every dollar. I'm looking into it, I'd said, which was true. I was researching properties constantly, learning about foreclosures and REOs and distressed assets. Well, don't wait too long, he'd said. The market's only going up. Pretty soon you'll be priced out forever and you'll be one of those guys renting their whole life. Meanwhile, I was 24, still renting that studio apartment that Garrett had declared smelled like financial failure, still working 60-hour weeks at my job as a property manager for a commercial real estate firm. Still learning everything I could about real estate investment, about property values, about how wealth actually got built rather than just looking like it had been built. My job gave me access to knowledge that most people never got. I saw behind the curtain of real estate, saw which property owners were actually making money and which ones were just barely scraping by. I learned about cap rates and cash flow and the difference between equity and actual wealth. But to Garrett, I was just his loser little brother who couldn't get his life together, who worked too much for too little, who didn't have the right car or the right clothes or the right lifestyle. When I'd started working overtime regularly, taking on extra projects, working weekends, covering shifts for colleagues who called in sick, Garrett had made it a punchline at family gatherings. "There's Kieran," he'd announced at a 4th of July barbecue, loud enough for everyone at the party to hear. "Working another 70-hour week because overworking will definitely make you rich, right? That's the strategy? Just work yourself to death and hope money magically appears?" People had laughed. Uncle Frank had raised his beer and said, "Kid's got work ethic, at least." "Work ethic without strategy is just exhaustion," Garrett had replied, like he was quoting some business book he'd skimmed. "You gotta work smart, not hard, little brother. Find the shortcuts. Impress the right people. That's how you get ahead." This from a man who'd never worked an honest 70-hour week in his life, who thought working smart meant schmoozing with his boss and finding ways to look busy without actually being productive, who was always angling for the promotion, the recognition, the pat on the head that would validate his existence. I'd kept my mouth shut that day, like I'd kept it shut hundreds of other days, smiled through the mockery, laughed along with everyone else at the joke about my life. But I'd never forgotten. I'd kept a mental tally of every slight, every dismissive comment, every time Garrett had made himself look bigger by making me look smaller. When I turned 25 and threw myself a modest birthday party, just a handful of friends at a local pizza place, nothing fancy, Garrett had shown up uninvited with Sienna. He'd looked around the pizza place with barely concealed disdain. "This is the party? Pizza and beer? Kieran, you're 25, not 15. "It's what I wanted," I'd said. "Low-key, just friends." "Yeah, but presentation matters," he'd said, sitting down and immediately ordering an appetizer that cost more than 3 pizzas. "You know what I did for my 25th? Rented out a whole rooftop bar. Open bar DJ, the works. People still talk about that party." What people also still talked about was how Garrett had put the entire $4,000 party on credit cards and was still paying it off 3 years later. But he didn't mention that part. Every family gathering became a stage for Garrett's performance. Every birthday, every holiday, every celebration, he'd find a way to take a shot at me, to remind everyone that he was the successful brother and I was the disappointment. At Mom's 60th birthday party, Garrett had given a toast that had everyone laughing and me dying inside. "To Mom," he'd said, raising his glass, "who raised 2 boys, one who made her proud by buying a house and building a career, and one who's still figuring it out. But hey, Kieran's only 30 now. He's got time. Maybe by 40 he'll have accomplished something worth bragging about." Everyone had laughed. Mom had tried to look disapproving, but she'd been smiling. I'd forced myself to laugh along, to be a good sport, to not make a scene at Mom's birthday. But inside, I'd been cataloging it, adding it to the list, remembering. At my 30th birthday party, which Mom had insisted on hosting despite my protests that I didn't want a big deal, Garrett had stood up to give a toast that I'd known was coming but couldn't escape. "To my little brother Kieran," he'd said, raising his beer bottle with that smirk I'd come to hate. "Who's 30 years old and still can't afford anything nice, still driving that same car from college, still living in that same apartment he moved into 8 years ago, still working those 60-hour weeks that definitely aren't paying off. But hey, we all can't be winners, right? Some of us have to keep the rental market alive. Cheers to being average, buddy. Everyone had laughed. It was just Garrett being Garrett. Just harmless ribbing between brothers. Just the family dynamic we'd always had. Except it wasn't harmless. It was death by 1,000 cuts. It was years of being told I was less than, that I was failing, that I should be grateful my successful brother even acknowledged me. I'd smiled that night, taken the joke, laughed along with everyone else, but I'd never forgotten, and I'd never stopped working. Because Garrett didn't know what I was building, didn't know about the properties I was acquiring, didn't know about the equity I was building, didn't know that while he was spending money he didn't have to look successful, I was actually becoming successful in ways that didn't need to be displayed. The worst incident, the one that had almost broken me, had happened at Garrett and Sienna's wedding 3 years ago. It was a lavish affair, way beyond what they could afford. $60,000 for 200 guests at a fancy venue with uplighting and a live band and a 5-course meal and top-shelf open bar. They'd financed half of it with a personal loan and credit cards, but it looked impressive, and that's what mattered. I'd been asked to be a groomsman, which I'd been genuinely honored by. Maybe I'd thought this was Garrett extending an olive branch. Maybe marriage was making him softer, kinder, more aware of family. I'd been naive. The bachelor party had been my first clue. Garrett had organized a weekend in Las Vegas. Flights, hotel, clubs, the works. The cost per person was $2,000. I couldn't afford $2,000 for a bachelor party. I was in the middle of renovating my first flip property, and every dollar mattered. So I'd told Garrett I'd meet them there for one night instead of the whole weekend. I'd drive down, hang out, drive back. Keep the cost manageable. "You're seriously not coming for the full weekend?" Garrett had asked, genuine disbelief in his voice. "I can't afford it right now," I'd admitted. "I'm working on a property flip and the budget's tight." "A property flip," he'd repeated. "Right. Your little hobby. Kieran, this is my bachelor party. You're my brother. You find a way to afford it." "I'll be there for one night," I'd said. "That's what I can do." He'd told everyone I was too cheap to come to the full bachelor party. Had made it a running joke all weekend, according to the other groomsmen who told me about it later. "Where's Kieran?" "Oh, he couldn't afford to hang with us. Guess property flipping doesn't pay as well as we thought." But the real humiliation had come at the wedding itself. During the reception, after a few drinks, Garrett had grabbed the microphone during what was supposed to be a heartfelt moment thanking his groomsmen. "I want to thank all my boys for being here," he'd said. "My best man Chad, who's been my brother since college, my groomsman Mike, who helped me move 3 times without complaint, Jake, who introduced me to Sienna in the first place, and my actual brother Kieran, who's here tonight despite his busy schedule of, what is it you do again, Kieran? Manage properties? Like a janitor?" The room had laughed. I'd felt my face burning. Kidding, Garrett had continued. "Kieran works very hard at his property management job. Makes barely enough to survive, but hey, he's consistent, and he's here tonight even though he had to save up for months to afford his tux rental. Let's give him a hand." People had clapped. They'd thought it was a good-natured roast. They'd thought Garrett was just being funny, showing affection through insults the way brothers do. But I'd seen Sienna laughing, seen Chad and the other groomsmen grinning, seen my own mother looking uncomfortable but not saying anything to defend me. I'd sat at that reception table in my rented tux, smiling through the humiliation, and I'd made a decision. Someday, somehow, I'd make sure Garrett knew exactly how wrong he'd been about me. Not for revenge, not to hurt him, just to prove that his entire narrative about our lives was fiction. While Garrett was bragging about vacations he couldn't afford and cars he was leasing to maintain his image, I was building something he couldn't see. Something real. Something sustainable. Something that would last. At 25, I'd saved $40,000. Every overtime shift, and there had been hundreds of them. Every bonus check, modest but consistent. Every dollar I could scrape together from living cheap went into my investment account. My coworkers thought I was weird. "Kieran, you're 25, they'd say. "Live a little. Buy a new car. Take a vacation. Get an apartment that doesn't smell like the previous tenant's cooking." But I'd seen too many people living paycheck to paycheck despite making good money. I'd seen too many people who looked successful but were drowning in debt. And I'd decided early that I'd rather be actually wealthy than just look wealthy. I lived cheap by design. Same studio apartment that cost $750 a month when everywhere else was $100-200 or more. Same used Honda Civic that was paid off and reliable. Same simple wardrobe of t-shirts and jeans that didn't scream, "I'm trying to impress anyone." And while Garrett was spending $400 on sunglasses he'd put on a credit card, I was saving $200 a month. While he was leasing a BMW he couldn't afford, I was driving my paid-off Civic and saving the difference. While he was going into debt for vacations in Cabo and Maui, I was staying home and investing. I'd learned real estate from the inside. Working as a property manager for a commercial real estate firm meant I had access to knowledge that most people never got. I saw behind the curtain, saw which properties were actually profitable and which ones were just breaking even or losing money. I learned about cap rates and cash flow analysis. I learned about the difference between equity and actual wealth. I learned that the real money in real estate wasn't in buying expensive properties. It was in buying undervalued properties, improving them, and either selling for a profit or holding for cash flow. And I'd learned the most important lesson. Wealth isn't built by looking rich. It's built by being cheap, being patient, and being smart when everyone else is being flashy. At 26, I'd made my first move. A foreclosure, a 2-bedroom condo in a neighborhood that had seen better days but was showing signs of recovery. The schools were improving, new businesses were opening, young professionals were starting to move in. I'd gotten it for $95,000 at a foreclosure auction. It needed work. The previous owners had trashed it when they'd been evicted, and the bank just wanted it gone. The carpet was destroyed. The kitchen was from 1987. The bathroom had water damage. I'd put $30,000 into renovations, doing some of the work myself on weekends, painting, basic repairs, landscaping. For the skilled stuff, plumbing, electrical, the kitchen remodel, I'd hired contractors but negotiated hard on price and managed the project closely to avoid cost overruns. 6 months later, I'd listed it for $165,000. It sold in 2 weeks. After all expenses, purchase price, renovations, closing costs, realtor fees, taxes, I'd netted $32,000 in profit. And I'd learned more in those 6 months than I'd learned in 6 years of formal education. I'd taken that $32,000 and immediately bought another property, and then another, and then another. Each time, I'd get better at identifying undervalued properties, better at estimating renovation costs, better at understanding which improvements added value and which ones were just expensive cosmetic changes that didn't impact sale price. By the time I was 28, I'd flipped 4 properties and started keeping some as rentals instead of selling everything. The first rental property was a 3-bedroom house I'd bought for $140,000, put $25,000 into, and rented out for $1,500 a month. After mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance reserves, it generated about $400 a month in cash flow. $400 doesn't sound like much, but it was $400 I didn't have to work for. $400 that came in whether I showed up to work or not. $400 that would continue coming in for decades if I kept the property. By 30, I owned 3 rental properties that generated $200 a month in total cash flow after all expenses. That was more than my studio apartment cost. I was essentially living for free, using rental income to offset my own housing costs. But I didn't tell anyone, didn't brag about it. Didn't post photos on social media with captions about building my real estate empire. I just kept working, kept saving, kept investing. By 32, I'd bought a duplex, a side-by-side 2-unit building where I lived in one half and rented out the other. My tenant's rent covered the entire mortgage, property taxes, and insurance. I was living completely free while building equity in a $280,000 property, and still driving the same Honda Civic, still wearing the same simple clothes, still looking, to everyone in my family, like the struggling little brother who couldn't afford nice things. By 33, I'd renovated and sold a small apartment building, netting $180,000 in profit that I immediately rolled into my next projects, and by 34, I'd quietly accumulated a real estate portfolio worth over $2 million in equity. 3 single-family rentals generating steady cash flow, the duplex I lived in for free, and enough liquid assets from recent sales that I was sitting on about $600,000 in cash, trying to decide on my next investment. That's when I'd seen the beach house listing, $1.9 million for an oceanfront property in Marina Vista, one of the most desirable beachfront communities on the coast. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean, private beach access, custom everything. It had been on the market for 6 months, slightly overpriced for the condition, which needed some updating. The owner was motivated. I'd made an offer, $1.8 million, with a quick close. They'd accepted. I'd wired $1.4 million from my investment accounts and taken out a small mortgage for the remaining $400,000, small monthly payments that my rental income more than covered, even with the beach house payment added in, and I'd bought it not as an investment, not as a flip, but as a home. My home. The first property I'd ever bought just because I wanted it, without doing a detailed ROI analysis or calculating the cap rate or thinking about resale value. I'd bought it because I could, because I'd earned it, because after a decade of living cheap and working hard and building wealth the slow, boring way, I wanted one thing that was just mine. And I'd bought it knowing that eventually Garrett would find out. I'd wanted him to find out the same way he delivered all his insults over the years. Publicly. Suddenly. In a way that would shatter his entire narrative about who we were. The house wasn't supposed to go public yet. I'd been planning to have a quiet housewarming, maybe post some photos eventually, let the news spread slowly through the family. But 2 weeks after closing, my contractor, a guy named Mike, who'd done the final renovations and really excellent custom work on the deck, had posted a photo on his business Instagram. It was an innocent post. Just a gorgeous shot of the sunset from my deck, with the caption, "Wrapped up another beautiful custom job. Nothing beats ocean views. Thanks to the client for trusting us with this dream project." Oceanfront, large luxury home, Ontran, custom construction. He'd tagged the location, Marina Vista, one of the most expensive beachfront communities on the coast. Within 6 hours, Garrett had seen it. I know because he'd called me, not texted, called, which he never did unless he wanted something or was really upset. "Is this real?" he'd asked without preamble when I answered. "Is what real?" "The house." Mike posted a photo. "Is that your place?" I'd considered lying. Considered telling him it was a client's house or a rental I was managing or anything other than the truth. But I was done lying. Done hiding. Done letting Garrett dictate the narrative of my life. "Yeah," I'd said. "That's mine." Silence on the other end. Long enough that I'd checked my phone to see if the call had dropped. "You bought a house in Marina Vista," he'd finally said, his voice strange, flat. "I did. Those places go for like $2 million. $1.9 million, I'd corrected. "I got a decent deal." More silence. "How the hell did you afford that?" The question came out aggressive, accusatory, like I'd stolen the money or committed fraud. "Real estate investment," I'd said simply. "I've been building a portfolio for 10 years. This was the reward." I'd heard him breathing on the other end, heard what might have been Sienna asking him something in the background. "Well," he'd said finally, his voice trying to sound casual and failing. "Congrats, I guess. Didn't know you had it in you." "Thanks, Garrett." "We should come visit, see the place. Sienna's been wanting a beach vacation." And there it was, the real reason for the call. "Maybe sometime," I'd said noncommittally. "How about next weekend? We're free. It'd be good to spend some quality family time, right?" "I'll have to check my schedule," I'd said. "I'll let you know." I'd hung up knowing exactly what would happen next. Garrett would decide he was coming regardless of whether I actually invited him. He'd show up expecting to be welcomed, expecting to stay in my house for free, expecting me to be grateful that he was gracing my home with his presence. He'd spent 34 years treating me like I was beneath him. Like I should be grateful for his attention. Like my accomplishments didn't matter, but his did. And now that I had something he couldn't afford, he wanted access to it. Wanted to post photos on social media showing off the family beach house. Wanted to use my success to boost his own image. I'd spent the next week preparing, making plans, getting ready for the confrontation I knew was coming. And when the text came 3 days later, not asking, but announcing, "We're coming this weekend. Sienna needs a break, and family should share these things. See you Saturday." I knew exactly what I was going to do. Saturday morning, I'd woken up early in my new bedroom, the master suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific, where I could lie in bed and watch the sunrise over the water. I'd made coffee in my new kitchen, the one with marble countertops and professional-grade appliances and a view that made every morning feel like a vacation. I'd sat on my deck, listening to the waves crash against the beach, feeling genuinely peaceful for the first time in months. And then I'd checked my phone. 7 texts from Sienna in a group chat that included me, Garrett, and apparently several of their friends I'd never met. "OMG, you guys, we're going to the beach house this weekend. Kieran's place is insane, literally right on the water. Like you can walk out the back door onto private beach I'm packing for 10 days. LOL, we're never leaving. Garrett says there's 4 bedrooms, so we have so much space. Can't wait to post all the content from this trip. Hirao, beach life, we are our luxury vacation. Yow, blessed Garrett and I have been so stressed we totally need this. Universe provides. Also, the neighbors are like super rich, so we need to look good. Packing all my designer stuff, 10 days. She'd literally announced to their friends and whoever else was in this group chat that they were staying at my house for 10 days without ever confirming if that was okay. Without asking. Without even pretending to ask, just assuming. The entitlement was stunning, but not surprising. This was exactly who Garrett and Sienna were, People who believed that Garrett's success entitled them to access to everyone else's success. People who thought family meant free access to your stuff. Garrett had texted separately at 8:47 a.m. Leaving now. Should be there by 1. Sienna packed a lot, LOL, you know how women are. Hope you have room for all our stuff. Also, we invited Chad and Melissa to come down for a day or two next week. They're pumped to see the place. Maybe we can do a little dinner party? You could show off your chef skills in that kitchen, haha. They'd invited other people. To my house? For a dinner party I'd be expected to host and cook for. Without asking. I'd stared at that text for a long moment, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I'd been preparing for since the day I'd bought this house. I could text back now, tell them not to come, handle this remotely and avoid the confrontation, or I could let them drive all the way here, let them arrive with their suitcases and their assumptions and their entitlement, and deliver the message in person. The old Kieran would have texted, would have tried to handle it gently, diplomatically, in a way that minimized conflict. But I wasn't that Kieran anymore. I'd called the Coastal Inn, a budget motel about 40 minutes inland that I'd looked up specifically because I'd known this moment was coming. Hi, I'd like to make a reservation for tonight, I'd told the woman who answered. Sure, what type of room? 2 rooms, actually, for 1 week. 1 week? Okay, king or double? 1 king, 1 double. She'd given me the total, $840 for the week. Both rooms. I'd paid with my credit card and asked her to email me the confirmation. Then I'd printed out the confirmation pages on my home printer, folded them carefully, and put them in my pocket. Then I'd sat on my deck, drinking coffee and watching the ocean, and waited. At 1:14 p.m., I'd heard it from inside the house. Music blasting, bass thumping, the unmistakable sound of my brother's leased BMW pulling into my driveway like he was arriving at his own vacation home. Some kind of hip-hop song that was all bass and bragging, loud enough that I'd heard it before I'd seen the car. I'd walked to the front window and watched them arrive. This performance they were putting on for themselves and whoever might be watching. Garrett had stepped out wearing those designer sunglasses that I knew cost $400. I'd seen him post about them on Instagram 3 months ago with the caption, "Treating myself to the finer things." You gotta look successful to be successful. For where's idiot? Luxury life. Self-care. Even though I also knew from his complaints to Mom that he was struggling with credit card debt and could barely make minimum payments. He'd stood there for a moment, looking at my house, and I'd seen something flicker across his face. Not happiness for me, not pride in his little brother's success. Envy. Pure, undisguised envy. Sienna had emerged from the passenger side, already holding her phone up at arm's length, filming herself, doing that breathy influencer voice that made me want to throw something. Oh my God, babe, look at this place. We're staying here for 10 days. This is literally a dream. I can't believe Kieran's been holding out on us. This house is gorgeous. She'd been wearing what was clearly a designer beach cover-up, white with gold threading, probably $300 or more, over a bikini that was definitely expensive. Her beach bag was Louis Vuitton, her sunglasses were Gucci, her sandals were probably Valentino. Every piece of her outfit screamed, I have money, despite the fact that she and Garrett were drowning in debt, and she worked part-time as a social media coordinator making maybe $35,000 a year. Her aesthetic was wealthy lifestyle influencer, even though her actual lifestyle was barely making rent and living off credit cards. Garrett had popped the trunk and started pulling out luggage. 3 massive suitcases, the expensive kind with hard shells and spinner wheels that cost $400 each at Nordstrom, a duffel bag that looked full to bursting, the beach chairs I'd mentioned, a Coleman cooler that probably weighed 40 pounds and was definitely full of beer and snacks, a bag of groceries, organic, expensive brands, the kind you buy when you're trying to look healthy and affluent. What looked like paddle boards or surfboards, which was hilarious because I'd never seen Garrett surf in his life. They'd brought enough stuff to move in permanently. Enough stuff for a month-long vacation, not a week. Sienna had still been filming everything, the house from different angles, the ocean in the background, Garrett struggling with the luggage, her own reactions. Creating content for her 8,000 Instagram followers who thought she lived a life of luxury when she actually lived in a rented townhouse with furniture from IKEA that she'd put on payment plans. Babe, get a shot of me in front of the house, she'd called to Garrett, posing with one hand on her hip and the other holding up her sunglasses. This angle is perfect. The ocean in the background. The lighting is amazing. God, we're so lucky. Garrett had dropped the suitcases and pulled out his phone to take photos of his wife posing in front of my house like it was hers. Like this was their vacation home. Like they belonged here. She'd gone through at least a dozen poses, Hand on hip, arms crossed, looking over her shoulder, candid laugh, hand in hair. Each one carefully calculated for maximum Instagram impact. Make sure you get the whole house in the frame, she'd instructed. I want people to see how nice it is. I'd watched this performance for about 2 minutes, feeling my resolve harden with every second. They weren't here to visit me. They weren't here to spend time with family. They were here to use my house as a backdrop for their social media fantasy, to pretend, for their followers and friends, that they were the kind of people who had access to oceanfront mansions. They wanted to photograph my success and present it as theirs. I'd walked to the front door and opened it. They'd both looked up, huge smiles plastered on their faces. "Kieran!" Sienna had squealed, immediately pivoting her phone camera toward me, still filming. "Oh my God, this place is incredible. We are so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having us. This is going to be the best week. No, the best 10 days. I already have so much content planned. Beach sunrises, sunset cocktails, morning yoga on the deck. This is going to be amazing for my feed." Garrett had walked up the porch steps with that familiar swagger he got when he thought he was winning, reaching for one of the massive suitcases. "Hey, little brother, thanks for having us. Place looks amazing from the outside. Can't wait to see the inside. Way to go, man. Really proud of you for finally accomplishing something. Knew you had it in you if you just applied yourself." The condescension in every word was palpable. Little brother, and finally accomplishing something. And if you just applied yourself, as if my success was something that required his approval, his validation, his gracious acknowledgement. Even now, even here, standing in front of a house he couldn't afford, he couldn't help himself. He had to position himself as the older, wiser one who was generously recognizing my modest achievement. He tried to push past me, dragging a suitcase toward the door, already assuming he'd be walking in, already planning where they'd put their stuff. I'd stepped directly into his path, blocked the entrance with my body, stood firm in my own doorway. "Where do you want these?" he'd asked, still not getting it, still assuming my blocking was accidental, that I'd move aside any second and welcome them in. I hadn't moved, hadn't stepped aside, hadn't smiled. I just looked at him, at the suitcase in his hand, at the entitlement on his face, and said the words I'd been planning for weeks. "You can leave them at the hotel?" Garrett's smile had faltered. "What?" "The hotel," I'd repeated, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the printed confirmation pages. "The Coastal Inn. I made you a reservation. 2 rooms for 1 week. It's about 40 minutes inland off Highway 101. According to Google reviews, the continental breakfast is adequate, which seems appropriate." I'd held out the papers. Garrett had stared at them like I was handing him a court summons. "Is this a joke?" he'd asked, trying to smile, trying to make it into something he could laugh off. "No joke," I'd said. "You're not staying here, but I didn't want you to be stranded, so I booked you a place. The motel isn't fancy, but it's clean. 2 stars. Should be fine for a week." Sienna had stopped filming. She'd lowered her phone slowly, her influencer enthusiasm evaporating like morning fog. "Wait," she'd said. We're not staying here? In the beach house?" "No," I'd said simply. "But why?" Her voice had gone up an octave. "We drove all the way here. We packed for 10 days. I told everyone. I posted that we were staying here." "That was presumptuous," I'd said. Garrett's face had started to change. The confusion was giving way to anger. "Kieran, what the hell is this? We're family. You don't book your family into a motel 40 minutes away when you have a 4-bedroom house right on the beach." "You're right," I'd said. "Family shouldn't do that to family. Family also shouldn't spend 34 years mocking their brother for being poor. Family shouldn't tell their brother he'll never afford anything nice. Family shouldn't announce they're staying at someone's house for 10 days without asking. But here we are." "Are you seriously still upset about that stuff?" Garrett had asked, genuine incredulity in his voice. "That was just jokes, man. That's how brothers are. We give each other shit. You're really going to hold that against me?" "It wasn't jokes," I'd said quietly. "It was years of you telling me I was a failure. Years of you using me as a punchline. Years of you making sure everyone knew you were successful and I was pathetic. That wasn't brotherhood, Garrett. That was cruelty." "Oh my God, you're so sensitive." Sienna had jumped in, her voice shrill now. "He was just teasing you. That's what families do. And now you're being vindictive and petty and ruining our vacation." "Your vacation that you invited yourselves to," I'd pointed out. "Because we're family," she'd shouted. "Then maybe you should have treated me like family," I'd said. Garrett had thrown the papers I'd given him onto the ground. "This is bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. You bought one nice thing and now you think you're better than us?" "No," I'd said. I bought one nice thing after building a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio while you mocked me for being poor. I'm not better than you, Garrett. I'm just done being worse than you in your imagination." His face had gone red. "A multi-million-dollar? You're full of shit. You're broke. You've always been broke. This house is probably mortgaged to hell, and you're pretending to be rich." $1.4 million cash, I'd said, plus a $500,000 mortgage that I could pay off tomorrow if I wanted to. 3 rental properties generating passive income, 1 duplex I live in for free, and about $600,000 in liquid assets. I'm not pretending anything. The color had drained from his face. Sienna had actually gasped. "That's not possible. You're lying." "Call my real estate agent if you want," I'd said. "His number's public. Ask him about my portfolio. Or don't. I don't really care if you believe me." "You've been hiding this?" Garrett's voice had cracked. "You've had money this whole time and you let us think you were broke?" "I let you think what you wanted to think," I'd said. "You decided I was a failure because I drove an old car and lived in a small apartment. You never asked what I was actually doing. You just assumed you were better than me and built your entire ego on that assumption. That's on you." Garrett had stood there, his expensive sunglasses reflecting the sun, his carefully cultivated image of success crumbling in real time. "So what?" he'd finally said, his voice tight. "You're just going to turn away your own brother? Make us drive 40 minutes to some shitty motel when you have 4 bedrooms?" "Yes," I'd said. "That's cold, man. That's really cold." "You know what's cold?" I'd asked. "Telling your brother he smells like financial failure, calling his car a pregnant toaster, laughing at his apartment, making a toast at his birthday party about how he'll never afford anything nice, doing all of that in public, in front of family, for years. That's cold, Garrett." "I was joking," he'd shouted. "No," I'd said. "You were establishing dominance. You were making sure everyone knew you were successful and I was a failure. That's not joking. That's bullying." Sienna had grabbed Garrett's arm. "Let's just go. This is humiliating. People are watching." She'd gestured vaguely toward the neighbors' houses, though I hadn't seen anyone. "Yeah," Garrett had said bitterly. "Let's go. Wouldn't want to impose on His Majesty's precious beach house." He'd turned to grab the suitcases, and that's when I'd seen it, the moment where his carefully constructed facade had completely shattered. His hands had been shaking, his face had been red, not just with anger, but with something else. Shame, maybe. Or the crushing realization that the narrative he'd built his entire adult life on was false. He'd picked up 2 of the suitcases and started dragging them toward the car. Sienna had grabbed the duffel bag, her face tight, no longer filming, no longer enthusiastic about anything. "You know what?" Garrett had said, turning back to face me one more time. "You win, okay? Congratulations. You're rich and I'm the asshole. Is that what you wanted to hear?" "I didn't want anything from you," I'd said. "I just wanted you to leave me alone, to stop making me the punchline of your jokes, to treat me like a human being instead of a prop for your ego." "Well, now you'll get what you want," he'd said, "because I'm done with you. Hope your beach house keeps you warm at night because you just lost your family." "I lost my family years ago," I'd said quietly, "when you decided that mocking me was more important than supporting me. This is just making it official." He'd stared at me for a long moment, looking like he wanted to say something else, wanted to have some devastating comeback that would win the argument. But there was no comeback, because he knew I was right. He'd thrown the suitcases into the trunk with more force than necessary, slammed it closed, and gotten into the driver's seat. Sienna had climbed in beside him, and I'd heard her say, "Turn the camera off. This is humiliating." For once, he'd listened to her. The BMW had backed out of my driveway, tires crunching on the gravel, and disappeared down the street. I'd stood there on my porch, watching them go, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because I'd finally stood up for myself, finally set a boundary, finally refused to be the punchline. Sadness because it had come to this. Because my brother and I had reached a point where I had to humiliate him to get him to respect me, but mostly satisfaction. Within 2 hours, my phone had exploded. 4 calls from Mom, 7 texts from various cousins, 3 messages from family friends who'd somehow heard about it already, and 1 absolutely unhinged voicemail from Garrett. I'd listened to Mom's voicemail first. "Kieran, honey, what happened? Garrett called me very upset. He said you turned him away from your house. He said you humiliated him. I don't understand. He's your brother. Can you please call me back?" The cousin's texts ranged from confused to judgmental. "Dude, did you really kick Garrett out? That's harsh. I heard you made them go to a motel. What's going on?" Family is family, man. Whatever beef you have, you work it out. But there was also this one, from my cousin Riley, who'd always been more perceptive than the others. Honestly, good for you. Garrett's been a dick to you for years. About time someone called him on it. I'd saved Garrett's voicemail for last, knowing it would be ugly. I hadn't been disappointed. You pathetic piece of... It had started with expletives I won't repeat. You think you're so much better than me now because you bought a house? You think that makes you special? You're nobody, Kieran. You're a nobody who got lucky with some real estate, and now you think you can treat family like garbage. Well, guess what? Nobody even likes you. You want to know why I was the only one who called you? Why you don't have friends? Because you're boring and bitter, and people can sense that. Enjoy your lonely beach house, you miserable asshole. Hope it was worth losing your family. The message had ended with the sound of him either throwing his phone or punching something. I'd deleted it without responding. The thing about Garrett's rant was that it revealed more about him than about me. The fury, the personal attacks, the need to tear me down, it all came from a place of deep insecurity. He'd built his entire identity on being better than me, and in one conversation, that foundation had crumbled. That evening, things had escalated to the family group chat. Mom had started it, probably hoping to mediate. Can we all please talk about what happened today? I don't like this fighting between my boys. Garrett had jumped in immediately. What happened is Kieran showed his true colors. After everything I've done for him growing up, looking out for him, being his big brother, he throws me out of his house like I'm a stranger. Made us drive to a motel. Do you know how embarrassing that was? I'd typed and deleted several responses before finally sending, "You didn't throw me out. You weren't invited in. There's a difference. I shouldn't need an invitation to my brother's house." Actually, yes, you should. That's how homes work. People invite you. You don't just announce you're staying for 10 days. My Aunt Linda had chimed in. Kieran has a point. You can't just assume you're welcome somewhere, even if it's family. Whose side are you on? I'm not on anyone's side. I'm just saying basic manners apply even to family. Sienna had joined, of course. You all should know that Kieran was cruel today. He humiliated us in front of his neighbors. He had a reservation printed out like he'd been planning this. This was deliberate and vindictive. It was a boundary, I'd typed. And yes, I planned it, because I knew Garrett would assume he was staying without asking. That's so messed up. My cousin Riley. Question. Did Garrett ask if he could stay, or did he just announce he was coming? Silence from Garrett and Sienna. That's what I thought. Mom had tried to calm things down. Can we please just talk this through? Kieran, I understand you're hurt. Garrett, maybe you could have asked first, but you're brothers, family. This shouldn't end a relationship. Mom, it's not just about today, I'd typed. It's about 30 years of Garrett treating me like I'm beneath him. Every family gathering, he's made jokes about how poor I am, how I'll never amount to anything, how I should be grateful he acknowledges me. Today was just the breaking point. Those were jokes. They weren't jokes to me. Oh my God, you're so sensitive. And that's when Mom had sent the text that changed everything. Garrett, honey, I need to be honest with you. Some of those things you said to Kieran over the years, they weren't nice. I should have said something at the time. I'm sorry I didn't. But Kieran's right. You were hurtful. The chat had gone silent. I'd stared at my phone, barely believing what I'd just read. Mom had never, in 34 years, acknowledged that Garrett's treatment of me was wrong. She'd always laughed along or changed the subject or told me to not be so sensitive. But now, finally, she was saying it. Garrett's response had come 5 minutes later. I can't believe this. My own mother is turning on me. Over what? Over Kieran's hurt feelings? This is unbelievable. It's not about taking sides, Mom had written. It's about acknowledging that words hurt. You've been dismissive of your brother for a long time, and now that he's set a boundary, you're angry. But maybe the boundary is fair. Garrett had left the group chat. Sienna had followed. The remaining family members had sent various messages of support. Some to me, some trying to play peacemaker, some just expressing confusion about the whole situation. But the message that mattered most had come from Mom in a private text. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I should have done more to protect you from that behavior when you were younger. I'm sorry I didn't, but I'm glad you're not accepting it anymore. I'd read that message 3 times, feeling something loosen in my chest that had been tight for years. Sunday morning, Sienna had posted a series of Instagram stories that were truly unhinged. Story 1. A photo of the Coastal Inn's sad exterior with the caption, "When family betrays you, sometimes the people you think love you show their true colors. forced to stay in this because someone's ego got bigger than their heart. Story 2. A photo of Garrett looking sad in the motel room with the caption, "He literally had 4 bedrooms and made us stay here. Remember, wealth without heart is just emptiness." Story 3. A long text post. Real talk. Just experienced the worst family betrayal. Someone we've always supported and loved got a little money and forgot where he came from. Pride comes before the fall. Praying for people who let materialism destroy their relationships. I'd watched these stories with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. She'd made them public, tagging the location, basically inviting her 8,000 followers to engage with her drama. And engage they did. The comments on her posts were split. Some people were sympathetic. "OMG, I'm so sorry. Family should never treat you like this." But others were asking questions. "Wait, why would you assume you could stay at someone's house without asking? And 10 days is a really long time to invite yourself somewhere?" And then one comment that made me laugh out loud. "Did you just post about staying at a beach house without being invited and then complain that you're at a motel? Ma'am." Sienna had deleted that comment immediately. But the damage was done. Other people started questioning the narrative, started asking what the full story was, started suggesting maybe there was more to this than Sienna was letting on. By Sunday evening, she'd deleted all the stories. But screenshots live forever. Riley had sent them to me with the message, "This is incredible. She's digging herself deeper." Monday morning, I'd gotten a call from an unknown number. I'd almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was spam, or maybe Garrett calling from someone else's phone. But curiosity had won out. "Hello? Kieran? This is your dad." I'd almost dropped my phone. Dad. My father, who'd divorced Mom when I was 10 and moved to Arizona, who I talked to maybe twice a year on birthdays and major holidays, who'd been largely absent from my life and from all the family drama that came with it, was calling me. "Hey, Dad, this is a surprise." "Your mother called me," he'd said without preamble. "Told me about what happened with Garrett this weekend, about the beach house and the motel and all of it." "I see," I'd said carefully, unsure where this conversation was going. "I need to tell you something," he'd continued. "Something I probably should have told you a long time ago, but never did because I'm a coward and I didn't want to deal with it. But you need to hear this. Garrett's jealous of you. Has been since you were kids." "What?" That wasn't at all what I'd expected him to say. "He's jealous," Dad had repeated. "Always has been. You were always the smart one, the thoughtful one, the one who could focus and work hard without needing constant attention and validation. Garrett needed constant praise, constant acknowledgement, constant reinforcement that he was special. And when you started succeeding quietly, without bragging about it or making a show of it, it drove him absolutely crazy because he couldn't compete with that kind of quiet competence." I'd sat down on my deck, staring out at the ocean, processing this. "That doesn't excuse how he treated me," I'd said finally. "No, it doesn't," Dad had agreed immediately. "I'm not calling to excuse it or justify it or ask you to forgive him. I'm calling to explain it, and to tell you something I should have told you years ago. I'm proud of you, for building what you built, for staying true to yourself when it would have been easier to become like Garrett, all flash and no substance. And I'm especially proud of you for standing up for yourself this weekend." "Thanks, Dad," I'd said, my throat tight. "Your brother needs to grow up," he'd continued, "and maybe this is what finally forces him to take a hard look at himself and his behavior. But Kieran? Whatever happens with Garrett, whatever he does or says or how he reacts, don't let this make you bitter. Don't let his garbage poison who you are. You're better than that. You've always been better than that." After we'd hung up, I'd sat on my deck for a long time, watching the waves roll in, thinking about what Dad had said. Was I better than bitterness? I didn't know, but I knew I was done being a punching bag, done accepting disrespect in the name of family harmony, done setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. That afternoon, Garrett's best friend Chad, one of the groomsmen from the wedding, someone I'd always gotten along with reasonably well, had sent me a text. "Hey man, heard about what happened. Garrett's been venting to me nonstop. Want to hear your side of things. Coffee?" I'd agreed to meet him at a cafe in town, curious about what he wanted to say. Chad had been waiting when I'd arrived, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Look," he'd said after we'd gotten our coffees and sat down, "I'm not here to take sides. I'm Garrett's friend, but I'm also not blind. I've watched him treat you like crap for years, and I've never said anything because it wasn't my place. But after this weekend, after seeing him completely melt down about you not letting him crash at your house, I feel like I need to say something." "Okay," I'd said, waiting. "He's jealous of you," Chad had said, echoing Dad's words. "Has been for a long time. And I think part of why he mocked you so much was because it made him feel better about his own situation. Because the truth is, Garrett's drowning. Financially, emotionally, all of it. He and Sienna spend way more than they make. Their house payment is killing them. The cars are leased, the vacations are on credit cards they can't pay off, the designer clothes, the fancy dinners, all of it. It's all borrowed money and borrowed time. I'd listened, not entirely surprised, but still taking it in. And then you, Chad had continued, you've been quietly building this empire without anyone knowing, without bragging about it or shoving it in anyone's face, and when he found out about the beach house, it shattered his entire worldview. Because he's been telling himself for years that he's successful and you're not, that he made the right choices and you didn't, that his way of living was superior to yours. And suddenly, undeniably, he was wrong about all of it. So what happens now? I'd asked. Chad had shrugged. I don't know. He's talking about cutting you off completely, never speaking to you again. But between you and me, I think he knows he screwed up. He knows he treated you poorly. He's just too proud to admit it, too scared of what admitting it would mean about himself. I'm not going to apologize for setting a boundary, I'd said. I'm not going to pretend that demanding to stay at my house for 10 days without asking was reasonable. I'm not asking you to, Chad had said. Honestly, I think you did the right thing. Someone needed to call him on his bullshit. I just wanted you to know what's going on in his head, or at least my best guess at it. We'd talked for another hour, about Garrett, about family dynamics, about the pressure people feel to look successful even when they're falling apart inside. Can I give you some advice? Chad had asked as we were leaving. Sure. Don't let this consume you. Don't spend the next 10 years replaying this moment or worrying about whether you did the right thing. You set a boundary. It was a fair boundary. How Garrett deals with that is his problem, not yours. Live your life. Enjoy that incredible house. Move forward. Don't let him take up space in your head anymore. It was good advice. I'd thanked him, and we'd parted ways. Hey, that evening, I'd gotten a text from a number I didn't recognize. Hi, Kieran. This is Sienna. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to apologize. Not for Garrett. He can apologize for himself if he ever gets his head out of his ass. But for my own behavior. The social media posts were immature and manipulative, and I'm embarrassed about them. You didn't deserve that. You didn't deserve any of this. I'm sorry. I'd stared at that text for a long time before responding. I appreciate the apology. Are you and Garrett ever going to work this out? I don't know. That's up to him. If he wants to actually apologize and acknowledge how he's treated me, I'm open to talking. But I'm not going to pretend the past 30 years didn't happen just to make everyone comfortable. That's fair. For what it's worth, I told him he was wrong. About all of it. He didn't listen. That's not your responsibility. I know. But he's my husband and I love him. Even when he's being an idiot. Which is pretty often lately. I'd almost smiled at that. Take care of yourself, Sienna. You too. And Kieran? That house is incredible. You should be proud of what you built. After that text conversation, I'd sat on my deck watching the sunset and feeling something shift inside me. The anger that had been driving me for weeks, maybe years, had started to dissipate. Not completely, but enough that I could breathe easier. I hadn't set that boundary with Garrett to hurt him. I'd done it to protect myself. To finally say, after decades of swallowing disrespect, that enough was enough. Whether he learned from it or not wasn't up to me. I'd done what I needed to do. The rest was his journey, not mine.